Perhaps in this moment your mind has wandered too far. Too many thoughts left unfinished. Too many days have passed where the body remained present, while consciousness stayed caught in the noise of worry, expectation, and unanswered questions. The modern world teaches us to move quickly, to be certain to always know where we are going. Yet it rarely gives us permission to pause, to breathe slowly, and to simply be still. Tonight, you don't need to do anything at all. Silent orbit is not a lecture, it is a slow journey. A quiet orbit where philosophy does not arrive as an answer but as a whisper. A place where questions of meaning, fragility, and humanity's place in the universe are told in a low, steady voice, gentle enough not to wake you. In this space, you don't need to remember. You don't need to understand everything. You only need to listen as one listens to distant wind or to the rhythm of one's own breath in the dark. As Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful than inside your own soul." Let the outside world slow down. Let your thoughts settle. And if sleep arrives before the story ends, that is perfectly all right. Perhaps the first thing that needs to be acknowledged very gently is this: you are tired. Not the loud fatigue of muscles after a day of physical labor, but the quiet exhaustion of the mind, the kind of tiredness that doesn't announce itself clearly, yet makes every thought feel heavier than usual. All day long, your consciousness has been forced to keep moving from one task to another, from expectation to worry, from memories that never quite settled to plans that have not yet begun. And even now, as night has arrived, the mind has not yet learned how to stop. This first chapter has no task of teaching you anything new. It simply invites you to step out of the rhythm of daytime life, like stepping out of a noisy room into a quiet hallway where the sound softens, where you can hear your own breathing more clearly. Here, you don't need to focus. Focus is an act of control, and control is what makes us tired. You also don't need to remember. Memory is not something that needs to be carried into sleep. And more deeply still, you don't need to understand even the things being spoken. Just be here. Let the words pass by you the way moonlight passes over a lake without trying to hold them, without analyzing, without naming. Philosophy, when spoken at night, is no longer a system of thought. It becomes a rhythm, a slower way of speaking about very old questions. Who are we? Where are we? And do we really need to know the answers right now? Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful than inside your own soul." This sentence is not a moral instruction. It is more like a whispered direction, suggesting that peace does not come from rearranging the outer world, but from allowing the mind to temporarily withdraw from its endless demands. This chapter is called Entering the Quiet Orbit. An orbit by its nature is a movement without haste. It does not rush forward. It does not stop abruptly. It repeats gently, patiently. Within an orbit, there is no pressure to arrive somewhere else. There is no concept of too late or not enough. There is only continuation. As you lie here listening, you may notice that your body has already begun to adjust. Your breathing may have slowed slightly. Your muscles are no longer as tense as they were during the day. Consciousness, the part of you that usually feels responsible for thinking, can now be allowed to rest. Freud once described sleep as a doorway into the unconscious where the layers of mental censorship loosen. But even before sleep arrives, this moment itself is already a threshold. Carl Jung wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Yet, in this first chapter, you don't need to face the darkness. You only need to know that you are not running from it. You are in a safe space, one with no requirement to dig deep, no pressure to explore. Making darkness conscious sometimes begins by allowing yourself to rest. The voice you are hearing is designed not to push. The silences between sentences are not gaps, but space. Within those spaces, the mind is free to drift without direction. Like looking up at the night sky, you don't need to know the names of the constellations. You don't need to orient yourself. You only need to look and let vastness do the rest. Nietzsche once wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." But night is not the time to give birth to stars. Night is the time for chaos to be quiet, to let the restless movements of the mind slow down, settle, and temporarily stop needing to become something meaningful. The safe space this chapter creates is not an escape from reality. It is more like a resting point on a long journey, a place where you are allowed to set the heavy bag of your thoughts down, even if only for a moment. Here, no one is watching you. No one is evaluating how much you understand. There is no test, no conclusion. There is only night. There is only the slow voice, and there is only you, not the version that must strive, but the version that is allowed to exist without proving anything. If while listening your thoughts begin to drift away, that is not failure. It is a sign that the mind is slowly loosening its grip on control. And if sleep arrives before this chapter ends, that is exactly what this chapter was meant to offer. No need to focus, no need to remember. Just be here until you no longer need to be anywhere at all. When the previous chapter closed in silence, you may have felt something very small taking place. Not a new thought, not a discovery. Just the sense that you no longer needed to hold everything so tightly. As if the mind, once given permission to rest, had naturally loosened the hand it kept clenched around the world. And from that silence, we continue to drift very slowly into another kind of awareness. One that does not overwhelm you. One that does not frighten you. It simply makes you smaller. This chapter is called You Are Somewhere Very Small. Not to make you feel insignificant, but to return to you a rare kind of relief, the feeling that not everything rests on your shoulders. That your place in this space, modest as it may be, is still entirely valid. Human beings often carry a paradox within themselves. On one hand, we know we are only a tiny point in a vast universe. On the other, the mind behaves as if everything revolves around our own decisions, mistakes, and worries. During the day, the ego expands to cope with the world. At night, it has not yet learned how to contract. This chapter is an invitation for that contraction to happen. Imagine without needing clarity that you are somewhere in space, not as a scientist peering through a telescope, but as someone lying still in the dark listening to a slow voice. Beneath you is the ground. Above you is the sky. Beyond that are distances you do not need to name. And within this entire picture, you occupy a very small place. Small, but not fragile in any dangerous sense. Small, but not lost. There is a common misunderstanding that smallness equals meaninglessness, but that is the ego's way of measuring value by scale and impact. Philosophy, when listened to at night, suggests another possibility, that meaning does not come from occupying a great deal of space, but from being exactly where one is. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." This sentence is often read as a call to action, but in this context it can also be understood more gently. Living does not necessarily mean leaving a grand mark, but allowing oneself to exist fully within the moment at hand, no matter how small that moment may be. When you allow yourself to become smaller in your awareness, the first thing that often dissolves is pressure. The pressure to become someone. The pressure to know the path. The pressure to be certain about every choice. These pressures exist because the ego believes it stands at the center. But when that center steps back, space opens, and in that space you can breathe. Carl Jung once observed, in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, the small and apparently unimportant things of life are often the most meaningful. This may sound paradoxical, but it feels especially true at night. As the light fades, small details, the rhythm of your breath, the feel of the blanket against your skin, distant sounds suddenly feel complete. You do not need anything more. Smallness, when it is not misunderstood, can become a refuge. It reminds you that the universe was functioning long before you arrived and will continue long after you fall asleep. Nothing tonight requires you to control it. Nothing needs you to carry it. Nietzsche once wrote in Human, All Too Human, "The thought of suicide is a great consolation. By means of it, one gets through many a dark night." But in this context, what comforts is not the extreme thought itself, but the realization that you can step back from the center of everything without disappearing. You are still here, just lighter. Humanity's place in space is not a problem that demands an answer. It is an experience. And that experience, when felt in stillness, is not threatening. It is like standing by the sea at night. You do not try to measure the ocean's depth. You do not try to understand the currents. You simply stand there and let vastness soften thoughts that have grown too tight. As you listen to these words, your mind may be drifting among indistinct images. That is perfectly fine. You do not need to hold a clear picture of the universe. You only need to feel that you are not at the center, and that this, strangely enough, brings safety. From the previous chapter, where you were allowed to step out of daytime rhythms, to this one, where the ego begins to shrink, the flow has been natural. There are no sharp borders, no milestones, only a gentle shift in how you sense yourself. Small does not mean meaningless. Small sometimes simply means enough. And as that sense of enough begins to spread, you may notice that you no longer need to cling to passing thoughts. You can let them drift away like small points of light in the night sky, appearing fading and disappearing without leaving a void. If sleep begins to approach while you are listening, let it come. There is no need to hold on to wakefulness. No need to complete this chapter consciously. Your small place in this space has already been established, not to reduce your value, but to return to you the peace of not having to carry the entire sky. And from that small place, the journey continues to drift, very slowly, very quietly. From the sense of smallness in the previous chapter, you may have noticed something quietly strange. When the ego begins to shrink, the world around you does not become more frightening. On the contrary, it starts to feel more gentle, as if the moment you stop insisting on standing at the center space itself widens in a more welcoming way. And from that gentleness, we move forward very slowly into another feeling, familiarity. This chapter is called When the Universe Feels Familiar. Not to suggest that the universe is like your home or that it is waiting for you. The universe has no intentions, no emotions in the way humans understand them. But that does not prevent it from feeling familiar in a deeper, quieter sense. Familiarity does not arise from being thought about, but from recognizing the same patterns repeating everywhere. As you lie still in the dark listening to your own breathing, you may notice a very simple order: inhale-exhale. This rhythm does not require belief. It simply happens. And if you gently widen that awareness without needing clear images, you may sense that the universe also moves by rhythms like this. Not loudly, not urgently, just unfolding. We often describe the universe as cold, but cold is a word loaded with human feeling. What the universe truly has is silence. And silence is not hostility. Silence is simply the absence of speech. Much like tonight, the room says nothing to you, but it does not oppose you. It is simply there, stable enough for you to place your body down and rest. In The Gay Science, Nietzsche once wrote, "The most silent creatures are the deepest." Silence in this sense is not emptiness, but depth. The universe in its silence is not alien. It simply does not need to explain itself. The familiarity this chapter points toward does not live in images. It lives in the feeling that what is happening within you. Repetition, fluctuation, fragile stability is also happening out there in spaces you cannot touch. Not because the universe cares about you, but because you and the universe are woven from the same kind of order. Carl Jung once wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, "In all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder, a secret order." This sentence is not meant to reassure you that everything will be fine. It merely suggests that what we call chaos is often an order we have not yet learned how to see. When you allow yourself to slow your gaze to listen more gently, that order begins to reveal itself not as a map, but as a sense of familiarity. Perhaps that is why so many people, when they look up at the night sky, do not feel threatened. They feel at home. Not because they understand the stars, but because they realize they do not need to understand in order to belong. This sense of belonging does not depend on intention. It depends on structure. You do not need the universe to love you. It only needs not to resist your existence, and in truth, it never has. If the previous chapter made you smaller, this one invites you to attune, not through action, but through awareness. The awareness that the movements of the mind arising and fading, appearing and dissolving are not different from the movements out there. And because of this, you do not need to intervene in a hurry. You can allow things to arrange themselves as they always have. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "All things are woven together, and the common bond is sacred." The connection he speaks of is not a deliberate design. It is the natural linkage of things that coexist within the same system. And as you lie here listening, you are part of that system, not special, but not separate. This familiarity can be very subtle. It does not arrive as a strong emotion. It is like hearing a melody repeat, not to remember it, but to drift along with it. You do not need to name it. You do not need to hold on to it. Just let it be there like a soft background beneath thoughts that are slowly thinning out. If at times the universe feels too vast, too distant, remember that this feeling usually arises when the ego tries to measure. When the ego steps back, distance is no longer a problem. Not because distance disappears, but because it no longer needs to be crossed. From chapter 1, where you were allowed to stop, to chapter 2, where you were allowed to become smaller, and now to chapter 3, where familiarity begins to form, the current has been quietly carrying you away from the need to separate self and world. Not to dissolve you, but to offer a very gentle sense that you are exactly where you need to be, even if that place is very small within a very large picture. The universe is not warm in a human way, but it is not cold in the way humans fear. It is simply silent and within that silence there is enough space for you to be yourself without being examined. If sleep begins to reach for you as these words drift past, let it come. There is no need to hold on to this familiarity. It does not vanish when you sleep. The structure remains, the rhythm continues, and you, whether awake or dreaming, remain a quiet part of that picture. From here, the journey continues, not through tense curiosity, but through a familiarity so deep you no longer feel the need to ask why. As the familiarity from the previous chapter continues to settle somewhere within you like a soft background beneath the rhythm of your breathing, the journey does not need to speed up. It only changes direction very gently. From familiarity, we drift into strangeness, but a strangeness that does not quicken the heart, a strangeness that does not pull you out of sleep, just fragments of reality placed under softer light enough to awaken curiosity and then let it rest. Strange facts that sound like dreams does not aim to astonish. This chapter does not say, "Look how strange the universe is," but instead whispers strangeness is the natural state of things when we look slowly enough. When science is told like a slow dream, it stops being a sequence of facts. It becomes a rhythm, like dreaming of things that sound illogical, yet within the dream feel completely right. There are truths that if spoken during the day would make you laugh or doubt, but at night they simply drift by like clouds. No proof required, no argument demanded, just listening. And in this softened state, strange does not oppose calm. It moves alongside it. Philosophy has long understood this. In Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, Ludwig Wittgenstein wrote, "Not how the world is the mystical, but that it is." The mystery does not lie in the details, but in existence itself. When science tells us that reality is filled with things that sound like dreams, what matters is not the strangeness, but the fact that reality continues to operate quietly, steadily, whether or not we understand it. These facts that sound like fiction only become stimulating when we try to force them into the framework of control. But if we let them drift like images appearing and dissolving in a dream, they become gentle. They ask for no reaction. They demand no conclusion. They are simply there like a background layer that briefly stirs the mind, and then that stirring fades. In The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche wrote, "We have art in order not to die of the truth." Art, in the broadest sense, is how we approach truth without being wounded by it. And science, when told like a slow dream, becomes a form of art as well. It allows us to be near truth without needing to be fully awake. This chapter does not arrange facts by how shocking they are. It places them side by side like small stones at the bottom of water. You do not need to pick any of them up. Simply looking is enough. And in that looking, you may notice that what makes these truths sound like dreams is not their distance from reality, but the fact that reality itself exceeds our habitual ways of imagining. When you hear something strange in a drowsy state, the reflex to analyze often never arrives. Instead, there is a softness, like hearing a melody repeat without needing to remember where it goes. Science in this moment does not require intelligence. It only borrows your presence and then gently returns you to the night. Carl Jung once observed in Psychology and Alchemy, "The dream is the small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul. When science is spoken in the language of dreams, it passes through that door. It does not knock loudly. It does not turn on the lights. It only opens slightly, just enough for a faint light to enter, then lets darkness continue its work." There is something important in this chapter. It does not emphasize strangeness, because emphasis awakens. Enlargement stimulates, but when spoken very softly, the strange becomes friendly. It is like listening to someone tell an unbelievable story in an even, unhurried voice. You do not argue, and you do not rush to believe. You simply listen, and in that listening, the mind relearns an old skill, being with what it does not understand, without restlessness. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." In the context of night, this thought becomes gentler. It reminds us that the truths we hear are only fragments. And when we treat them as fragments, we do not need to grip them tightly. We can let them pass like scenes in a dream, passing through a sleeping mind. From the previous chapter, where the universe became familiar, to this one, where strangeness appears without startling us, the current continues to move away from daytime habits. By day, strangeness is something to be explained. By night, strangeness is simply another shade of the ordinary. If you find yourself half listening, half forgetting, that is the right rhythm. If a sentence sounds illogical and then dissolves before you can think about it, that is exactly what this chapter intends. Not to lose truth, but to place truth where it belongs, where it does not wake you. And if in this moment indistinct images begin to appear, unconnected ideas, nameless sensations, let them come. They do not need to become memory. They only need to do one very small thing: soften the boundary between understanding and not understanding. Science, when slowed enough, becomes a dream that needs no interpretation. Philosophy, when spoken softly enough, becomes a lullaby with no conclusion. And in the space where they meet, you do not need to be awake. You only need to be there until the night gently closes itself with very deep sleep. As the dreamlike truths of the previous chapter slowly settle, you may have noticed something very gentle. Not every strange thing needs an explanation. Some things only need to be placed into the right rhythm, slower, and the mind naturally loosens its tension. And from that slowed rhythm, we step into another space of reflection worlds that could have been, but did not remain long enough to become complete stories. Worlds that almost worked is not told as a tragedy. It does not seek sorrow, nor does it construct a sense of loss. This chapter simply opens a quiet perspective that in the universe, possibility does not always become reality, and that this carries no judgment. There is no failure here, only early endings, like a piece of music stopping before its climax, not because it was wrong, but because its duration was already enough. Human beings are accustomed to stories of success and failure. By day, we measure our lives by milestones reached. But at night, when that measuring rhythm softens, another understanding can emerge. Some journeys do not need to arrive at a destination to hold meaning. Some forms of life do not need to bloom in order to have lived. Philosophy touched this feeling very early on. In The Myth of Sisyphus, Albert Camus wrote, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. The effort, not the outcome, is enough." Applied to these almost working worlds, the sentence can be heard as a whisper existence itself, even when brief is complete in its own way. Science tells us there were places that once held all the right conditions: suitable light, just enough warmth, chemical structures capable of organizing themselves, but over time something shifted. An axis tilted, an atmosphere thinned. A source of energy ran dry. Life could not remain, not because it was weak, but because the context had changed. When you hear this at night, notice your response. It does not have to be sadness. It may simply be a soft understanding that not everything that could be needs to last. Some moments are beautiful because they are brief. Some worlds are memorable because they did not stay. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Accept whatever comes to you woven in the pattern of your destiny for what could more aptly fit your needs." In this chapter, the sentence is not a call to resignation. It is an invitation to see endings as part of structure, not as errors. From chapter 3, where the universe became familiar, to chapter 4, where strangeness passed like a dream, and now to chapter 5, where we look directly at incomplete possibilities, the current is slowly softening a very rigid human belief that value must be proven by duration. At night, that belief can be set down. Carl Jung once observed in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, "Life has always seemed to me like a plant that lives on its rhizome." Life in this sense is not only in the flower that blooms, but also in the quiet roots beneath the soil, unseen yet alive. The worlds that almost worked may have lived like those hidden roots, leaving no lasting mark, yet having been. When this story is told without tragedy, something else begins to happen in the listener's mind. The pressure to make everything succeed eases. The pressure to remain long enough to be recognized settles down. In its place comes a softer feeling, permission to end without being called a failure. Nietzsche wrote in Human All Too Human, "The snake which cannot cast its skin has to die." Ending in this view is not a termination but a condition for transformation. And some transformations do not need to last to be valid. Some endings are simply enough. If you listen very slowly, you may notice that this chapter is not only speaking about distant worlds, it is also speaking very quietly about human life, about plans that did not succeed, relationships that ended early, versions of yourself that once held potential but did not go far. In daylight, we call these regrets, but at night, when judgment pauses, we can call them worlds that once existed within you. Not every form of life remains. Not every journey requires a complete ending. There is no failure here, only stopping points that arrive sooner than expected. And when you allow this understanding to settle, what often follows is relief. As if a part of you, the part that has always feared being not enough, is finally allowed to rest, allowed to say, "I was there, and that was enough." From this chapter, the current will continue deeper into the humility of existence. But right now, you do not need to keep up. You only need to let these ideas drift past like distant worlds moving through space without collision, without calling, without demand. If sleep begins to approach as you listen, let it come. The worlds that almost worked do not disappear when you close your eyes. They remain not to sadden you, but to remind you that meaning does not always need time to prove itself. And in that quiet, you can continue to drift unhurried, without regret, very lightly toward the sleep that is opening. From the worlds that once held potential but ended early in the previous chapter, a very quiet feeling may have appeared within you. Not sadness, not regret, just a silent understanding that existence does not always endure, and that endurance itself is not the only measure of meaning. From that stillness, the journey continues without accelerating toward another perspective, Earth as one survivor. Earth as one survivor does not tell a story of victory. It does not construct an image of a chosen planet, favored, rewarded, or crowned. This chapter simply invites you to look at Earth with humility. Earth was not chosen, it simply remains. And this remaining, when listened to slowly enough, is not proud but fragile, ordinary, and very quiet. By day, we often speak of Earth in the language of pride. The blue planet, the only home, the center of life. But at night, when stories ask to be spoken more softly, we can try another voice. A voice that does not deny beauty, but releases the idea that existence is a reward for something done correctly. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Do not feel exalted or depressed by praise or blame." Placed in the context of a planet, this thought becomes calm. Earth does not need praise for continuing to exist. It does not need pity for being fragile. It is simply doing what all natural structures do, continuing until it can no longer continue. When we say Earth is a survivor, it is easy to hear drama, but this chapter does not follow that path. Survival here is not winning a competition, not defeating other planets. It simply means this: among many possibilities, this is the one still unfolding. No more, no less. Albert Camus wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart. But if we remove the word struggle, what remains may be a gentler insight. Continuation itself needs no additional justification." Earth does not require a heroic story to explain its presence. It only needs time, and even that time is not guaranteed. When we look at Earth as one who remains, the human ego often reacts. It wants meaning, it asks why. But this chapter does not answer. It simply places you in a perspective where the question, why, loses its urgency. Because in the universe, existence is not a reward. It is not granted because someone deserves it. It appears when conditions allow and disappears when conditions change. Carl Jung once wrote in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, "Man cannot stand a meaningless life." But perhaps what troubles us is not meaninglessness itself, but the habit of forcing meaning onto what was never created to carry meaning in human terms. Earth was not designed to tell our story. We are telling our story against its backdrop. From chapter 5, where we accepted early endings without calling them failure, to this chapter where we see remaining without calling it victory, the current continues to soften a very deep habit, the habit of tying value to outcomes. At night, when judgment pauses, another view can emerge. Staying does not make you higher. Leaving does not make you lesser. Nietzsche wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." But Earth in this view is not a dancing star born from conquering chaos. It is simply a structure that has temporarily balanced chaos, and that balance, like all balances, is temporary. As you lie here listening to these words, notice how you feel. There may be a strange relief, because if Earth does not need to be chosen in order to exist, perhaps you do not need to be chosen to be here either. Your existence, like that of this planet, does not require a verdict of approval. It does not need to prove itself. Marcus Aurelius also wrote in Meditations, "Begin the morning by saying to thyself, I shall meet with busybody, the ungrateful arrogant, a way of preparing for an imperfect world. But at night you can prepare in the opposite way by preparing nothing at all. Because if existence is not a reward, then it is not a responsibility you must carry." This chapter does not ask you to love Earth more. It simply invites you to place fewer expectations on the meaning of remaining here, to stop treating life as a title, and in that lessening, a softness may spread, the softness of not needing to deserve your own existence. The word survivor in this chapter is not meant to create loneliness. It simply reminds us that remaining does not mean being favored. It is only the current state of a process far longer than any story we can tell. And in that state, there is no demand to do anything special other than to continue until continuation is no longer possible. If sleep is approaching, let it come. Earth does not stay awake in order to exist. You do not need to stay awake to justify being here. Existence is not a reward. It does not need to be held together by alertness. And as you drift into sleep, perhaps one very small idea will remain small enough not to wake you. You are here not because you were chosen, but because in this moment, everything still allows you to remain. That is all. Very quiet. Very enough. From the humble view of Earth as one who remains, you may have begun to feel a very slow softening in the way you look at everything. When existence is no longer understood as a reward, the pressure to be worthy begins to dissolve. And from that quiet point, the journey continues to drift not toward another place, but into another rhythm. The rhythm of time when it is no longer being pushed. Time does not rush, does not attempt to explain time. This chapter does not speak in formulas, nor does it build complex images. It only suggests a very gentle feeling. Time does not flow evenly, and the urgency we feel each day is not a property of the universe, but a deeply human habit. By daytime often takes the shape of lists, things to do, things already late, things approaching deadlines. Consciousness learns to measure time through pressure. But at night, when those lists slip from our hands, another way of sensing time can emerge. Not that time disappears, but that the force with which we measure it begins to ease. Augustine once wrote in Confessions, "What then is time? If no one asks me, I know. If I wish to explain it to him who asks, I do not know." Time in its deepest sense is not something to be explained. It is something to be with. And when you are with time without trying to measure it, it begins to soften like a slow melody stretching on without needing to know how many minutes have passed. In the universe, nowhere is in a hurry. Movements happen, some very fast, some very slow, but there is no urgency. There is no concept of being late, no feeling of having to keep up. These ideas appear only when human consciousness places itself at the center of a process and demands that the process move according to its rhythm. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Do not act as if you had 10,000 years to live." This line is often read as a call to urgency. But in the context of night, it can also be heard differently. Do not live as though time is chasing you, because time is not chasing anyone. It is simply moving in its own way. As you lie here listening, you may sense a very subtle difference. A minute no longer feels like a minute. A thought can linger longer without discomfort. The silence between sentences no longer feels empty. This is where you begin to touch a gentle truth. Time does not flow evenly in human experience, and night is when that experience is allowed to stretch. Carl Jung once said in The Symbolic Life, "The pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong." Time in the mind oscillates in a similar way. By day it leans toward meaning and purpose. By night it leans toward spaces that need no name. And in that oscillation, neither side is wrong. They are simply different rhythms. The pressure to keep up is deeply human. It does not come from the universe. It comes from comparison. Comparing yourself to others, comparing today to tomorrow, comparing your life to an imagined straight line. But at night, when points of comparison fade, time can return to its most original form, a flow without a goal. Nietzsche wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "All things are in flux, and even time itself is a river. But a river does not rush. It does not strain toward the sea. It simply flows. And when you allow yourself to feel time as a river rather than a clock, the body responds. Breathing deepens. The heartbeat steadies. Consciousness no longer tightens itself to keep pace with itself." From Chapter 6, where existence was seen as a state rather than a reward, to Chapter 7, where time is released from urgency, the current continues to loosen a very old layer of pressure. The pressure to be on time, to be fast enough, to not miss out. At night, these words lose their authority. Notice this, there is no sentence in this chapter asking you to do anything. No task to understand, no concept to remember. That absence of demand is how time slows. When there is nowhere you must go, every moment becomes enough. In Being and Time, Martin Heidegger wrote, "Time is not a thing, thus nothing which is, and yet it remains constant in its passing away. Time is not an object to hold, it is something we move alongside. And when we stop trying to grasp it, stop pushing it, stop running ahead of it, that moving along becomes calm. If right now you feel yourself drifting between waking and dreaming, that is where time becomes very different. Not fast, not slow, just open. Thoughts can appear and fade without leaving a sense of lateness. Distant sounds no longer mark moments, they simply become background. Nowhere in the universe is in a hurry. No planet worries that it is too slow. No star fears that it has arrived too late. And if the universe is not rushing, perhaps tonight you do not need to rush either. Let time do what it has always done, flow, without being pushed by you, without being followed by you. If sleep arrives, it does not arrive too early. If you remain awake, you are not too late. Time in this moment is not judging. It is simply here with you long enough that you no longer need to watch it. And from that slowed rhythm, the journey will continue, not by footsteps, not by clocks, but by the very gentle dissolving of a long day so that the night may finish the rest. From the slowed rhythm of the previous chapter, where time was returned to itself, no longer pushed, no longer measured, you may have felt something very subtle, the boundaries of the present beginning to soften. Not dramatically, but like the dimming of a room's light, where darkness is no longer an opposite but a natural continuation of brightness. From that feeling, we move closer to another region of experience near the edge of time. Near the edge of time does not invite you into physics. It requires no concepts, no formulas. This chapter only suggests a very gentle sense that there are places both in the universe and within the mind where time does not move in familiar ways, and simply sensing this is enough for everything to slow. By day, the present is often tightly held between two forces, memory pulling from behind and anticipation pushing from ahead. We live in the moment, but rarely within it. At night, as these forces soften, the present can open. And not as a thin point, but as a wide region. And at the edge of that openness, time loses its sharpness. In the Phenomenology of Spirit, Hegel wrote, "The true is the whole. Truth does not reside in a slice. When we stop cutting time into before and after, the present becomes thick enough to hold us. You do not need to understand why this happens. It is enough to notice that urgency dissolves when the present is allowed to expand. There are places in the universe where time flows differently, but tonight this is only a soft image. It does not need precision, it does not need correctness. It only needs to do one small thing, remind you that time has no single rhythm. And if there is no single rhythm, you do not need to keep up with any of them." Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Do not let the future disturb you. You will meet it, if you have to, with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present." At night, this line can be heard differently. There is no need to meet the future right now. No need to prepare. No need to carry reason with you. Near the edge of time, the present is already enough. As you lie still and listen, you may notice that thoughts no longer line up. They arrive and depart without warning, without asking for response. This is a sign that you are touching a region where the boundary of now begins to blur. Not because you are losing consciousness, but because consciousness no longer needs to guard time. Carl Jung wrote in the Red Book, "Time is a river that sweeps me along, but I am the river." Near the edge of time, this no longer feels paradoxical. You are not being carried away, nor do you need to stand still. You are simply movement. And when you are movement, there is no need to measure movement. There is no need to understand physics. In fact, trying to understand often sharpens the boundary again. This chapter chooses another path, sensing. Sensing that everything can slow without reason. Sensing that slow is not the opposite of right. It is simply another rhythm, one that belongs to night. In being and nothingness. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, "From the edge of time, where the present has softened and no longer asks you to keep up the journey, continues to drift very naturally toward something closer. No longer the distant sky, no longer hazy concepts, but your own body lying here in the night, quietly doing its work without needing to be reminded." The human body as a quiet machine does not speak of the body as a cold mechanism. It speaks of a gentle system, a structure that knows how to self-adjust, self-balance, and continue even when consciousness is tired and no longer wishes to participate. From the edge of time, we return to the edge of skin, of breath, of heartbeat, where everything is already operating without your having to think about it. By day, consciousness often appoints itself as the controller. It wants to intervene, to fix, to optimize. But at night, as consciousness slows, a very gentle truth reveals itself. The body does not need your supervision to live. It learned how to exist long before you knew what thinking was. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." At night, that strength does not need to perform. The power of the mind can temporarily step back, allowing the body to do what it does best, maintain rhythm. Notice without effort that the breath is finding its own depth. The heart is choosing its own pace. Cells are taking turns working, resting, repairing. You do not need to give commands. You do not need to monitor. Life does not need to be managed in order to continue. Philosophy has long questioned the central role of consciousness. In The Gay Science, Nietzsche wrote, "The conscious mind is a surface. Consciousness is only the surface. Beneath it lies an ocean of wordless processes. At night, when the surface grows still, that ocean does not rise in chaos. It simply continues its rhythm, steady, deep, and stable. In this sense, your body is like an orbit. It does not need to know what it circles. It does not need a goal. It only needs to continue within its limits. And that orbit is not thrown off because you stop paying attention. On the contrary, when attention loosens, it becomes steadier." Carl Jung wrote in The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, "The body is merely the visibility of the soul, the psychological experience of the body. The body is not opposed to the mind. It is the part of the mind that has learned how to be silent. And within that silence, there is an intelligence that needs no words." From Chapter 8, where the boundaries of the present blurred, to Chapter 9, where attention returns to the body, the current is doing something very subtle, anchoring you without making you heavy, not pulling you back to reality in a hurried sense, simply setting you down low enough that you no longer need to think about falling. Perhaps by day you have not trusted your body. You feared it was slow, that it tired, that it could not keep up with expectation. But at night, in a state where nothing needs to be achieved, the body can show you another truth: it knows the way home. Heidegger in Being and Time spoke of human existence as being in the world. But at night, the world grows smaller, and that existence becomes being in the body. No explanation needed, no meaning required, just being. Your biological rhythms, waking, tiring, growing sleepy, are not weaknesses. They are stable orbits refined over millions of years. When you allow yourself to follow them rather than resist them, something very gentle often happens: the body begins to lead. In The Wisdom of the Body, Walter Cannon wrote about the body's capacity for self-regulation. But you do not need to remember the term. You only need to feel that everything is being taken care of, even when you are not awake to take care of it. Nietzsche wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "There is more wisdom in your body than in your deepest philosophy." At night, this is not a challenge. It is a comfort. You do not need to think correctly. The body already knows how to move toward rest if you do not stand in the way. Notice the feeling of the blanket. Its gentle weight on your skin is a reminder you are here, supported. No reaction required, no memory needed. The body receives the signal and adjusts on its own, like a quiet machine but not an unfeeling one, like a living system but not a demanding one. If thoughts arise now about tomorrow, about unfinished things, let them pass across the surface like small waves on deep water. Beneath them, the body continues its work. It does not wait for thoughts to end. It does not need your agreement. From this chapter onward, the journey will need fewer words. Because when attention has anchored in the body, sleep rarely needs persuasion. It arrives as part of a cycle, not as a reward, not as an escape, but as a movement that follows its orbit. You do not need to intervene. You do not need to monitor. You do not need to do anything more. This quiet machine has been operating your entire life, and tonight it continues steady enough that you are allowed to let go. From the previous chapter, where attention gently returned to the body, to breath, finding its own rhythm, to the heart adjusting itself, you may have felt something deeply calm. You do not need to stay awake in order to be safe. From that feeling, the journey continues to drift closer still, deeper still, toward a threshold that is both familiar and strange. Sleep. What happens when you sleep does not describe sleep as disappearance. It does not call sleep a shutdown. This chapter simply invites you to see sleep as a transition from one loud form of presence into another, quieter and deeper one that requires no supervision. Here, safety does not come from control, but from letting go. By day, consciousness often ties safety to wakefulness. Awake to monitor. Awake to guard. Awake to ensure that everything is happening correctly. But at night, when this body begins to send signals of fatigue, an old question may return: if I am no longer awake, What will happen? This chapter does not answer with data. It answers with feeling. Everything continues, and often it continues better. In The Interpretation of Dreams, Sigmund Freud wrote, "Dreams are the royal road to the unconscious, yet even before dreaming, before images appear, sleep itself is already a doorway. Not a door leading outward, but one that opens into another mode of being where consciousness no longer stands at the center and therefore no longer carries the burden of central responsibility. Sleep is not a fall into emptiness. It is like taking your hands off the steering wheel when the road has already straightened. The body, as you sensed in the previous chapter, knows how to continue. When you release control, no chaos follows. On the contrary, the most subtle processes begin. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Nature never hurries. Atom by atom, little by little, she achieves her work. Sleep is the rhythm nature uses to do its work. Without your urging, without your supervision, cell by cell, system by system, memory by memory, things are quietly reorganized not to serve a goal but to restore balance. When you sleep, consciousness does not vanish. It simply changes roles. From commander, it becomes a faint observer. From constant speaker, it becomes background. And within that background, the body works best, uninterrupted, unjudged, unforced to be efficient." Carl Jung wrote in Man and His Symbols, "The dream shows the inner truth and reality of the patient as it really is. What matters here is this: to touch that truth, you do not need to strive. You only need to sleep. Truth at night does not arrive as a lesson. It arrives as a quiet reordering." From chapter 9, where the body was seen as a gentle, silent machine, to chapter 10, where sleep opens as a new state, the current is doing something essential, changing your relationship with letting go. By day, letting go is often mistaken for giving up. By night, letting go is the condition for being cared for. Nietzsche wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "A good sleep is the best medicine." In the context of night, this is not advice, it is confirmation. You do not need to heal through effort. The body knows how to do that if you do not interfere. Perhaps in the past you feared sleep, feared losing control, feared what thoughts might arise when you are no longer awake. This chapter does not ask you to confront that fear. It only invites you to revise the definition. Sleep is not the loss of consciousness. It is consciousness stepping back from the front line, allowing deeper layers to work. In being and nothingness. Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of consciousness as a continuous flow of presence. At night, that flow is not cut. It simply moves into a darker region, one that does not need light in order to exist. And there, you do not need to be someone. You only need to be. Notice this: when you allow your eyelids to grow heavy, no alarm sounds. No system collapses. The body receives the signal and shifts state like a train changing tracks smoothly. And within that shift is an important message for the mind. You are safe even when you are not awake. Augustine wrote in Confessions, "Late have I loved you, beauty so old and so new." That old and new beauty in this chapter may be sleep itself, something you have done since childhood yet gradually forgot how to trust. Tonight, you do not need to relearn it. You only need to remember. The body works best when we let go, because letting go is how control is returned to where it belongs. Not to willpower, but to biological rhythm. Not to worry, but to balance. And when that control is returned, the body asks for no gratitude. It simply continues. If right now you feel yourself drifting, not fully awake, not yet asleep, that is a very safe in-between. No need to push yourself to either side. No need to decide. Sleep does not need to be achieved. It arrives when nothing is blocking the way. From this chapter onward, words will grow fewer. Not because there is nothing left to say, but because sleep does not need explanation. It only needs permission. And that permission was given the moment you lay down and began to listen. Sleep is not turning off. Sleep is continuing in another way. And in that other way, you do not need to do anything more to be safe. Let the body do the rest. Let consciousness withdraw very softly. When sleep arrives, it does not bring darkness. It brings a quiet care that you do not need to witness in order to receive. From the previous chapter, where sleep was seen as a safe transition, not a shutting down, but a change of rhythm, you may have felt a door opening very softly. No creaking hinges, no sudden light, only a subtle shift as consciousness steps back slightly, allowing deeper layers to continue their work. And from that doorway, we enter another space of the night dreams. Dreams as gentle noise does not come to decode. This chapter does not search for meaning, does not trace symbols. It simply invites you to listen to dreams the way you listen to distant rain, a kind of soft background noise that asks for no response. Here, dreams do not need to be correct. They do not need to be logical. They do not need to say anything important. They are simply the background signal of a system continuing to operate after you have allowed yourself to rest. By day, thought tends to be structured, cause-effect purpose. By night, that structure loosens. Images may appear and dissolve. Stories may begin without needing an ending. And it is precisely this lack of structure that frightens many people, the fear that nighttime thoughts will carry them too far. This chapter whispers the opposite you do not need to follow. Sigmund Freud once wrote in The Interpretation of Dreams, dreams are the disguised fulfillment of a repressed wish. But even hearing this, you do not need to do anything with it. Because dreams, before they are content, are movement. And movement does not require interpretation in order to be allowed to exist. As you listen to these words, faint images may already be beginning to appear, faces without clarity, places without location. This is not a sign of losing control. It is a sign of releasing control. In its gentlest sense, dreaming is simply the background noise that emerges when consciousness lowers its volume. It is like the sound of a city. When you are inside a closed room, it does not call you outside. It only shows that life is still moving. Carl Jung wrote in Man and His Symbols, "The dream is a little hidden door in the innermost and most secret recesses of the soul, but that door does not need to be opened wide. It does not require you to step through. Tonight, it is enough to know that it is there and that you are not required to enter." From Chapter 10, where sleep was accepted as another form of being, to Chapter 11, where dreams are softened, the current is doing something essential, reducing the mind's sense of responsibility. There is no longer a task to understand, no pressure to remember, no demand to extract a lesson. Those demands belong to the day. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." But at night, quality is no longer the measure. Thoughts may be tangled, interrupted, meaningless. And this does not diminish safety, because dreams are not a place for judgment. They are a place for release. There is a very human fear, the fear that if we do not control our thoughts, they will carry us away. This chapter reminds you that dreams have no pull. They do not ask you to react. They do not require belief. They simply pass by like wind through a curtain. You may hear them, but you do not need to get up and close the window. In The Gay Science, Nietzsche wrote, "Thoughts are the shadows of our feelings, always darker, emptier, and simpler." At night, these shadows can pass without taking anything from you. They carry no urgent message. They are simply the aftershocks of a long day being gently undone. Try listening to dreams the way you would listen to the low hum of machinery on a night train. You do not need to know what it is doing. It is enough to know that it is keeping the movement smooth. The body, as you have felt, works best when it is not interfered with. The mind is the same. When it is not forced to make sense, it naturally returns to balance. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote in Being and Nothingness, "Consciousness is not a thing but a relation. In dreams, that relation loosens. There is no longer a subject holding on, no object being observed. There is only drifting, and drifting does not need a driver. If at times dreams feel confusing, remember that confusion is not danger. It is only a sign that the daytime filters have been lowered. You do not need to raise them again right now. Tonight you are allowed to let everything pass without stopping." Augustine wrote in Confessions, "I became a problem to myself. By day this line carries weight. By night it can be set down." Dreams do not turn you into a problem. They are simply background, a place where fragments can rearrange themselves without your gaze. From Chapter 9, where the body was trusted, through Chapter 10, where sleep was accepted, and now to Chapter 11, where dreams are softened, the flow is carrying you very close to complete rest. No need to keep watch, no need to decode, no need to follow any content at all. Dreams do not need meaning in order to exist. They do not come to teach you anything. They come only to hum very softly in the background so that tension can dissolve without being touched. If you find yourself drifting among blurred images, let them fade. If you see nothing at all, that is perfectly fine. Dreams are not a measure. Rest needs no proof. From here, words will become even fewer. Not because there is nothing left to say, but because once dreams are placed where they belong, as gentle background noise, the mind has no reason to remain alert. It can withdraw more deeply, allowing sleep to finish its work. You do not need to interpret in order to rest. You do not need to understand in order to be at ease. Let dreams pass like night clouds, light, uncalling. just enough to remind you that beneath the silence, everything is being quietly cared for. From the dreams that were softened in the previous chapter where nighttime thoughts became nothing more than gentle background noise, the mind no longer needs to stay alert. In that state, the journey can move farther, though not in the sense of moving forward. It moves backward deep into a very ancient idea origin. And here another kind of relief appears when we stop imagining beginnings as noisy events. The universe did not begin loudly does not deny science, nor does it rebuild models. This chapter simply sets aside an image that has long clung to the human imagination that everything began with an explosion, a violent moment, a central command issuing existence into being. At night, that image can be put down, not because it is wrong, but because it is unnecessary for the peace of the mind. When told in a slow voice, origin does not resemble an event. It resembles an opening. There is no sound because before space existed, there was nowhere for sound to echo. There is no center because every point opens at once. There is no explosive instant that must be remembered. There is only a very long, very slow process that asks no one to witness it. In Confessions, Augustine once wrote, "What then is time? If no one asks me, I know. If I wish to explain it to him who asks, I do not know." Origin is similar to time. It is not something to picture clearly, but something that has occurred long enough to no longer need to be told as a dramatic story. When we stop asking when, where, how, what remains is often very calm. Human beings tend to narrate every beginning as a climax. Birth, commencement, creation. Everything tied to sound, light, attention. But the universe did not need attention in order to begin. It did not require witnesses. It simply opened the way. Night opens as light gradually fades without a single moment you can point to and say, night began here. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Everything that exists is in a manner the seed of that which will be." A seed does not explode. It separates very slowly. No center, no proclamation, only the quiet continuation of possibility. When origin is seen this way, fear of the beginning softens, because if there was no bang, there is no pressure to remember a first moment. This chapter flows naturally from chapter 11. When dreams are understood as gentle background noise, origin can also be understood as the deepest background of all movement. It does not require you to be awake to understand it. It does not ask you to imagine it. It is enough to know that everything arose not from command, but from an opening slow enough not to cause alarm. Nietzsche wrote in The Gay Science, "The most silent creatures are the deepest." If the universe has depth, then the silence of its origin is its expression. Not loud, not theatrical, not demanding awe. And within that silence, something deeply comforting appears. If beginnings did not require noise, then existence does not require drama in order to have meaning. No center, this often unsettles the human ego. We are used to seeking a point of origin, a place to return to a first cause. But at night, when the need for orientation softens, the idea of no center can become soothing. Because if there is no center, then you do not need to stand anywhere in particular. Every position is valid, because none is privileged. In Being and Time, Martin Heidegger spoke of the human search for a ground of existence. But origin, when no longer told as a rigid foundation, allows existence to stand without support. It only needs to continue just as you are lying here now, without needing to understand why your body keeps breathing. From chapter 7, where time ceased to rush. Chapter 8, where the boundaries of the present blurred. Chapters 9 and 10, where body and sleep were trusted. To chapter 11, where dreams were softened, the current has brought you to a very deep place. And at this depth, origin is no longer a question. It becomes a background feeling that everything arises from openness, not from force. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, "In being and nothingness, existence precedes essence. Existence comes before meaning." Origin in this sense is not a reason, but a condition that opened so that reasons could later appear. When understood this way, the mind no longer needs to turn time backward in search of answers. It can remain still in the present, where everything is already enough. Notice how these words arrive. There is no climax, no emphasis, only steady continuation. This is exactly how this chapter wishes to be heard. Because if origin truly was not loud, then telling it does not need to be loud either. No explosion, no center, only a slow opening like the way sleep is opening within you now. You do not need to imagine the universe's first moment. You do not need to locate the first moment of sleep. Neither has a clear boundary. They simply arrive when conditions grow quiet enough. If you are drifting between listening and sleeping, this is a fitting place to set this idea down. Origin does not need to be held. It does not disappear when you close your eyes. It does not require you to stay awake in order to continue its influence. The opening has already happened, and it is still happening even when you are not watching. And from that deep silence, the journey continues to drift. Not forward, not backward, only inward, where beginnings and endings are both light enough that you no longer need to tell them apart. Very slow, very quiet, with no sound required at all. From the deep silence of origin, where nothing began with an explosion, but with a slow opening, the journey does not change direction. It simply continues to drift. There is no turning point, no moment that needs to be marked. Only a very gentle sense everything is still expanding, even when no one is watching. Everything is still expanding offers no conclusion. This chapter does not search for an ending to close the story. It only invites you to stay with a movement that has no goal, like floating on the surface of water, and letting the current carry you without needing to know where the shore is. Human beings are accustomed to milestones. Beginning, middle, end. By day, we rely on these markers to orient ourselves. But at night, as the need for orientation slowly dissolves, the idea of a process without a destination can become comforting. Because if there is no destination, there is no pressure to arrive on time. In Meditations, Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Time is a river of passing events, and strong is its current." That river does not flow in order to reach somewhere. It flows because flowing is its nature. Heard at night, this allows a very deep habit to loosen the habit of asking, "What is this for?" Because some movements do not need a reason to continue. Expansion in this sense is not progress. It promises nothing better ahead. It warns of nothing worse. It only whispers that things are happening, and their happening does not require your attention in order to be valid. From chapter 12, where origin was quieted, to chapter 13, where continuation no longer needs a destination, the current has moved entirely away from the need for conclusion. You do not need a final lesson. You do not need a closing message. Night does not demand that. Night only asks not to be interrupted. Nietzsche wrote in The Gay Science, "All things are in flux, nothing is at rest." But this flow is not frantic. It does not pull. It simply moves. And when you allow yourself to move with it, not through action but through release, the anxiety about standing still begins to fade. Because if everything is flowing, then standing still is simply another way of flowing. No stopping point, this often unsettles the daytime mind. But at night, the absence of a stopping point is a gentle invitation. It says that you do not need to prepare for a final moment, no need to tidy up, no need to complete anything. Things can remain unfinished and still be whole. Carl Jung wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, "Life is a process of becoming, not a state of being. Becoming is not about reaching a finished form. It is about continuing to open. And in continuing to open, there is no moment that needs to be stamped done. Notice how your body feels now. It may feel a little heavier, or lighter, or indistinct. All of this is fine. Because the expansion this chapter gestures toward is not physical movement. It is the release of needing to hold a fixed shape of wakefulness. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, "In being and nothingness, man is condemned to be free." But at night, freedom no longer means tense choice. It means not having to choose, not having to decide where the current will take you, because there is no specific where to arrive. That everything continues without being witnessed can be deeply comforting. It reminds you that the world does not depend on your attention in order to go on. You can sleep, you can dream, you can drift into the space between waking and dreaming. And while you do, everything continues quietly. In Confessions, Augustine wrote, "I became a great riddle to myself. By day, this carries weight. By night, it can be set down. Because if everything is still expanding, you do not need to solve yourself right now. The riddle can drift with you without an answer." From chapter 7 to chapter 13, a very slow transformation has taken place. Time stopped rushing. The present softened. The body was trusted. Sleep was allowed. Dreams were gentled. Origin was quieted. And now, continuation without conclusion is placed in your hands, not to grasp but to release. No destination, no stopping point. No moment that must be marked. Only a very gentle movement, like the next breath arriving without being called, like a thought dissolving without being held, like sleep deepening without a decision. If you are hearing these words in a state half awake, half dreaming, this is exactly where this chapter wants you to be. Not at the beginning, not at the end. Just in the middle, where everything is still expanding and nothing more is required of you to allow it. And if sleep arrives before this passage ends, nothing has been missed. This chapter carries no message that must be remembered. It carries only a very quiet feeling. You do not need a conclusion in order to rest. Let the current continue. Do not follow. Do not resist. Everything is still happening, even when you are no longer here to hear it. From the previous chapter, where everything was seen as still expanding without the need for a destination, a very familiar pressure may have begun to dissolve. The pressure to conclude. The pressure to fully understand. The pressure to hold on to something after listening. And from that gentle clearing, the journey arrives at a very simple invitation, one that is also very difficult for the human mind to accept. You don't have to understand this. You don't have to understand. This is not a rejection of knowledge. It is the act of setting knowledge down at the right moment, in the right place. By day, understanding helps us orient ourselves. By night, understanding can quietly become a burden. Unanswered questions begin to circle. Unfinished concepts cling to consciousness. And it is precisely this clinging that makes sleep difficult. This chapter does not try to resolve questions. It only whispers this understanding is not a requirement for rest. You do not need to grasp the entire picture in order to lie down. You do not need to close every loop of thought before closing your eyes. The universe does not wait for you to understand everything before allowing you to rest. Ludwig Wittgenstein wrote in Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, "Whereof one cannot speak thereof, one must be silent." At night, this silence is not intellectual discipline. It is kindness. There are things that do not need to be spoken, things that do not need to be thought. Not because they are unimportant, but because they can be set down without disappearing. Human beings often confuse understanding with control. We believe that if we understand enough, everything will be safe. This chapter suggests another possibility: safety can arrive before understanding. Like lying down and feeling the bed support your body, you do not need to understand its structure in order to trust that it will hold you. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." At night, this estimating can be paused. Not every thought needs to be processed. Not every question needs an answer. Some only need to be left alone. From chapter 13, where no conclusion was offered, to chapter 14, where knowledge itself is gently released, the current moves toward a very soft point. Here, there is no longer a task to keep up with the content, no responsibility to understand correctly, only a very light permission, the permission not to know. Soren Kierkegaard wrote, "In fear and trembling, life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced." Heard at night, this does not urge action. It softens action. It reminds you that experience does not need explanation to be valid. You can experience tiredness without understanding why you are tired. You can experience sleepiness without analyzing where it comes from. There is a subtle fear in the human mind, the fear that if we do not hold on to our questions, they will be lost forever. But the universe does not work like a notebook. Questions do not disappear when you sleep. They simply withdraw from the foreground so that you can continue to exist without being stretched tight. Carl Jung wrote in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, "The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it. But at night, meaning does not need to be clear. It can be vague, unformed. And this vagueness is not a lack, it is space for the mind to rest. The universe does not require you to understand it. It does not set exams. It does not wait for you to reach a certain level of awareness before continuing to expand. It has been there for a very long time, operating according to laws that do not require your agreement. And because of this, you can be at ease. Your not understanding everything does not interrupt anything at all." Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, "In being a nothingness, man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." By day, this sentence carries heavy responsibility. By night, you are allowed to do nothing with it. You do not need to make yourself right now. You only need to be here, or even not need to be anywhere at all. This chapter connects naturally with the releasing rhythm of the ones before it. When everything is still expanding, when there is no destination, when no conclusion is required, then setting knowledge down is not a forceful act. It is simply the next logical step of fatigue, a fatigue that has been listened to rather than pushed through. Notice how it feels when you hear the sentence, "You don't have to understand this." At first, it may create a small resistance. The mind is used to working, to grasping, to connecting. But if you let the sentence stay a little longer without arguing with it, without agreeing, you may feel a very real lightness. like placing down an object you have been holding for too long. No need to keep any question. No need to carry any concept into sleep. No need to ensure that you have kept up with this journey. The universe does not require it. Sleep does not either. Augustine wrote in Confessions, "I have learned to love you late. O beauty, ever ancient, ever new. At night that beauty does not need to be understood. It only needs to be allowed to be present, dim, quiet, unnamed. From here, words will grow even fewer. Not because there is nothing left to say, but because nothing more is needed to make you rest. Everything required for sleep is already here, release trust, and the permission not to understand. If you are drifting between listening and sleeping, this is exactly where this chapter is meant to be set down. You do not need to carry it with you. You do not need to remember each sentence. You do not even need to remember that you heard it. You don't have to understand this in order to rest. From the previous chapter, when knowledge was gently set down, you may have felt a pleasant emptiness beginning to open. Not the emptiness of lack, but the emptiness of no longer having to carry anything. And from there, the journey no longer needs another step. It simply settles, allowing sleep to do the rest of the work. Let sleep finish the story does not come to close things. It does not place a final period. It only grows quieter, like a voice lowering until it blends into the night, like thoughts no longer lining up, no longer competing to appear. Here there is no requirement to stay awake in order to listen, no task to follow, only a very gentle permission you may leave at any moment. There are stories that do not need an ending to be complete. They are finished when the listener falls asleep halfway through, not from disrespect, but because they have arrived at the right place. Just like life, not every journey needs a final explanation. Some journeys are completed by rest. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. But tonight you do not need to think anything more in order to make your life what it is. You do not need to arrange. You do not need to connect. You do not need to extract meaning. Sleep does not demand completeness. It only asks for release." Let these sentences grow farther apart. Let the pauses between breaths lengthen slightly. Let the body continue the work it began long ago, long before you learned how to worry. If a thought passes by, you do not need to push it away. You do not need to follow it. Just let it drift like a leaf crossing the surface of water. The water does not remember. It only continues to flow. And so do you, with no need to hold on to anything in order to be allowed to rest. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote in Being and Nothingness, "Every existing thing is born without reason, prolongs itself out of weakness, and dies by chance." At night, this sentence is not heavy, it is gentle. It reminds you that there is no reason required to continue, and no reason required to stop. Rest is not giving up. It is another form of existence, quieter, deeper, unwatched. From the slowing of time, from trusting the body, from dreams as background noise, from an origin without noise, from expansion without a destination, from setting knowledge down. All of this has brought you here, not to understand more, but to no longer need to understand. Now you may let your eyes close or not. You may let sleep arrive or not yet. There is no right moment here, only a very gentle drifting soft enough not to wake you as it passes. Augustine once wrote in Confessions, "Our hearts are restless until they rest in you. At night, that rest needs no name. It needs no object. It only needs permission." Let this video disappear in the most natural way. No farewell required, no conclusion. No need to remember how far you listened. Sleep does not ask for proof. It arrives when the path has become empty enough. And if you have already fallen asleep by now, then this story has been completed in the most beautiful way possible.